I never expected to find it sitting right there on the kitchen counter like it had been waiting for me. We had only been at the rented house in the mountain valley near Bozeman for 3 days when the ground underneath my family started shifting in a way I could no longer ignore. The trip was supposed to be simple, the kind of annual gathering we had done for years whenever my parents found a place big enough for all of us to spread out without stepping on each other. My mother Donna had spent the afternoon putting away groceries and humming to herself while my father Mark checked the woodpile out back. My older brother Andrew and his partner Eric had driven in that morning with the last of the coolers. My cousin Nicole had already claimed the loft bedroom with the best view of the mountains and was unpacking her bags like she planned to stay a month. I had come up from my small apartment 2 hours south because I still believed these trips could feel like family instead of something I had to survive. My little business making custom journals and leather accessories had been growing steadily for the past 2 years. I was not rich, but I was finally paying my own bills without panic and had a couple of local shops carrying my work. I had told myself that was enough. I had told myself the quiet satisfaction I felt when an order came through was worth more than anyone's approval. That belief lasted exactly until I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water after everyone else had gone to bed. Andrew's phone was lying face up on the butcher block island, the screen still glowing because he had not locked it. A text thread was open. It was not the family group chat. It was a private conversation between him and my father that had been going on for weeks, maybe longer. My hand froze on the glass. I should have walked away. I should have poured the water and gone back to the room I was sharing with Nicole. Instead, I stood there and read the words my older brother had typed about me. He had written that my business was basically a hobby and that I was stretching the truth when I mentioned steady orders. He told my father I had asked him quietly last month if he could cover part of my share of the house rental because things were tight. None of that was true. I had paid my portion in full 2 weeks before we left. I had never asked him for money. The only thing I had ever asked was whether he wanted to see the new designs I was working on for the holiday season. He had said he was too busy. My father had replied with a single line that hurt more than anything Andrew wrote: "She's always been good at making things sound better than they are. Just let her have it if it keeps her happy." No pushback. No correction. Just quiet agreement that I was someone who needed to be managed and pitted. I felt the air leave my lungs in one long, silent breath. The kitchen was warm from the wood stove, but I suddenly felt cold all the way to my bones. I set the glass down without drinking from it and backed out of the room like the phone itself might accuse me of something. If you have ever stood in a quiet house at night and realized someone you trusted had been quietly rewriting your life for other people, you know the particular kind of stillness that follows. I did not cry. I did not march upstairs and wake Andrew. I walked out onto the back deck instead, pulled one of the old quilts off the porch swing, and wrapped it around my shoulders. The mountains were dark shapes against a sky full of stars. I could hear the creek running somewhere below the house. For a long time I just sat there and let the words I had read settle into my chest like stones. I had always been the quieter one between me and my older brother. He was the one who told the big stories at holidays, the one who made everyone laugh with exaggerated versions of family memories. I was the one who listened, who noticed when someone's glass was empty, who remembered to ask how work was going. I had never competed with him. There had never been a reason to. Now I understood that the absence of competition had not protected me. It had simply made me an easy target for a story he preferred to tell about the two of us. The next morning I tried to act normal. I helped my mother make breakfast while my cousin Nicole talked about a new hiking trail she wanted to try. My father sat at the table reading the paper like nothing had changed. Andrew came down late, poured coffee, and asked Eric if he wanted to drive into Bozeman for supplies. He did not look at me any differently. That was somehow worse. The casual way he moved through the kitchen made me wonder how many other conversations like the one I had seen had happened without me knowing. I spent most of the day outside, splitting kindling and stacking it even though we did not need it yet. The repetitive motion helped. Every time I brought the axe down, I pictured one of the messages I had read and let the impact travel up my arms. I was not angry in the loud way people expect. I was hurt in a deep, private place that had been bruised before and had learned to stay quiet about it. My older brother had always been the golden one in my father's eyes. I had told myself that was just how families worked sometimes. I had told myself it did not matter as long as I kept building something of my own. The text thread had made it impossible to keep telling myself that story. That evening, the local families who lived year-round in the valley had invited us to a small potluck at the community barn down the road. It was the kind of gathering that happened a few times each summer, mostly for the people who stayed through the long winters. We brought a couple of casseroles my mother had made and a tray of cookies Nicole had baked that morning. I wore a simple sweater and jeans, nothing that would draw attention. I was hoping to stay in the background, maybe talk to one or two of the older women who asked polite questions about where we were from. It did not work out that way. We had been there less than an hour when one of the neighbors, a woman named Shirley who ran a small pottery studio, asked me what I did for work. I answered honestly and briefly, the way I always did. I told her I made journals and leather goods and sold them online and to a few shops. I mentioned that the past year had been steady enough that I was thinking about hiring a part-time helper for packaging. Shirley nodded with real interest and asked if I had pictures on my phone. I was reaching for it when my older brother stepped into the circle of people around us. He laughed in that easy way he had, the one that made strangers relax. "Mia's always been creative," he said, loud enough for the whole group to hear. "She's got this little setup in her apartment where she plays around with leather and paper. It keeps her busy between jobs. We're all just glad she's found something that makes her happy, right?" The words landed exactly like the ones I had read on his phone. They were soft on the surface and sharp underneath. They painted me as someone who needed a hobby to stay occupied, not someone running a real business that paid her rent and gave her pride. A couple of the neighbors smiled politely and changed the subject to the weather. Shirley gave me a small, uncertain look before she moved on to talk with someone else. I stood there holding my phone and felt the heat rise in my face even though the barn was cool. My father was standing a few feet away with a plate of food. He heard every word. He did not correct my older brother. He did not say anything at all. He just took another bite of potato salad and looked at the floor like the conversation had never happened. That was the moment the last thread of hope I had been holding for him finally let go. I had spent years making excuses for both of them. I had told myself my father was just tired, that my older brother did not mean it the way it sounded. Standing in that barn with the smell of hay and warm food around me, I finally let myself admit the truth I had been avoiding. They had both decided a long time ago who I was allowed to be, and it was someone smaller and less real than the life I was actually living. I stayed at the potluck until it was polite to leave. I helped carry empty dishes to the car and thanked the hosts. On the walk back to the house I stayed a few steps behind everyone else, letting the cool mountain air settle over the burn in my chest. My cousin Nicole tried to loop her arm through mine and chat about how nice the people were, but I answered in short sentences and eventually she let the silence sit between us. When we reached the house, I went straight to the small desk in the corner of the living room where someone had left a stack of old notepads and pens. I was looking for a piece of paper to write down the name of a trail Shirley had mentioned when I pulled open the top drawer and saw it. A single envelope, yellowed at the edges, with my name written on the front in my father's handwriting. It was not sealed. The flap had come loose years ago. I stood there with the envelope in my hand and felt the weight of the evening settle even heavier. I did not open it right away. I closed the drawer, walked to the back deck again, and sat on the swing with the quilt around my shoulders for the second night in a row. The stars were the same as the night before. Everything else had changed. I knew I could not keep pretending this trip was just another family gathering. The text thread, the words in the barn, my father's silence, and now this envelope I had not known existed were all pieces of something larger that had been building without me. I was not ready to confront any of them yet. But I also knew I would not be able to sleep until I understood what else had been kept from me. The mountain valley that had felt peaceful when we arrived now felt like a place where the truth was going to come out whether I was ready or not. The next morning I finally opened the envelope I had found in the drawer. I carried it out to the back deck while everyone else was still moving around inside, making coffee and deciding on breakfast. The paper inside was thin and creased from years of being folded and unfolded. My father's handwriting, the same careful printing he used for everything important, filled both sides. It was dated almost 6 years earlier, right around the time I had first started selling my journals online and told the family I was trying to make it into something real. The letter was not addressed to me. It looked like a draft he had written to his sister, my distant Aunt Carol, but had never sent. In it he described my little projects and said he hoped they would keep me occupied without making me think I could actually support myself. He wrote that my older brother had already warned him I tended to make things sound bigger than they were and that it was probably best not to encourage me too much. He ended the page with a line that made my hands shake even now. Andrew says it's kinder this way. She'll come around eventually and stop pretending she doesn't need the family to fall back on. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully along the old creases and slipped it back into the envelope. 6 years. My father had been carrying this version of me, the one my older brother had helped create, for 6 years. Every time I had shared a small win with them, every time I had posted a picture of a new design or mentioned a shop that wanted to carry my work, they had already decided it was not real. The quiet strength I had spent years building felt suddenly fragile, like something that could be erased with a few sentences typed late at night. I did not confront anyone that morning. I helped my mother with the dishes and listened to my cousin Nicole talk about the trail she wanted to hike later. My older brother sat at the table with his partner Eric, scrolling through his phone and occasionally laughing at something on the screen. My father read the paper like he always did. I watched them all and felt the distance between us grow wider with every ordinary minute that passed. They had no idea I had seen the thread. They had no idea the letter existed in my pocket. For the first time in my life I understood that keeping the peace had cost me something I could not get back. We went on the hike Nicole had suggested. The trail wound through pine trees and opened up to a meadow with a view of the mountains. It should have been peaceful. Instead, every step felt like I was walking through the version of me my older brother had described to other people. At one point Shirley, the neighbor from the potluck, passed us on the trail with her dog. She stopped to say hello and asked me again about my journals, saying she had looked up my small shop online the night before and liked the designs. Before I could answer, my older brother stepped forward with that same easy laugh. "Mia's got a real eye for that kind of thing," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder like we were in on some joke together. "It's cute how she's turned her little hobby into something that keeps her busy. We're all proud of her for sticking with it even when it's not exactly a career." Shirley's smile faltered for half a second. She looked at me, then back at him, and changed the subject to the weather. I felt the familiar burn in my chest, but I did not correct him. Not yet. I simply stepped out from under his hand and kept walking. My father, who was a few paces behind us, said nothing. My mother glanced at me once with a small worried line between her eyebrows but stayed quiet too. Only my cousin Nicole looked confused, like she had missed something important. That night after dinner the accidental forward happened. We were all sitting in the living room. The wood stove crackled and my mother was knitting while my father dozed in his chair. My cousin Nicole was on the couch with her phone, sending pictures from the hike and the potluck to the family group chat so everyone could see them later. She had been laughing and narrating each photo out loud. At one point she meant to forward a single picture of the meadow to her own mother, but her thumb slipped and the whole conversation thread she had been in with my older brother earlier that week went out instead. The thread appeared in the family group chat before she could stop it. It was a private exchange between her and my older brother from 3 days earlier. In it he had written that I was always playing the victim whenever anyone asked about my life and that my business was probably just an excuse to avoid getting a real job. He had added that our father agreed with him but would never say it out loud because he did not want to deal with the drama. Nicole had replied with a question mark and a worried emoji, clearly uncomfortable. My older brother had followed up with "Just don't tell Mia I said any of this. She's sensitive about it." The messages sat there in the group chat for everyone to see. My mother's phone lit up first. Then my father's. Eric's. Even mine, though I was not in the original private thread. Nicole stared at her screen in horror, her face going pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I didn't mean to, that was the wrong thread. I'm so sorry, Mia." The room went very still. My older brother's face tightened for a split second before he forced the easy smile back on. My father cleared his throat and looked down at his hands. My mother set her knitting down slowly, her eyes moving from Nicole to me and back again. No one spoke for a long moment. The only sound was the wood shifting in the stove. I felt the vulnerability rise up like a wave I had been holding back for days. All the small cuts from the text thread on the counter, the words in the barn, the letter in the drawer, and now this. They had not just been downplaying my work. They had been building a story that made me smaller and more fragile than I actually was, and they had been passing that story around behind my back like it was fact. My cousin Nicole looked like she might cry. She kept apologizing, saying she had only been venting with Andrew because he had brought it up first and she had not known what to say. I stood up. The quilt I had been holding slipped to the floor. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at my older brother and said the words I had been turning over in my head since the first night on the deck. "I saw the messages on your phone the other night," I told him. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but steady. "And I found the letter Dad wrote years ago. I know what you've both been saying about me." My father's head came up sharply. My older brother's smile disappeared completely. For the first time since we had arrived at the Mountain Valley house, the easy confidence he carried everywhere looked cracked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. My mother reached for my hand but I gently pulled it back. I was not ready for comfort that might ask me to smooth things over the way I always had. The air in the room felt thick with everything that had been left unsaid for years. My cousin Nicole was still staring at her phone like she could will the messages to disappear. Eric looked uncomfortable and kept glancing at my older brother as if waiting for him to fix it. My father's face had gone pale under the lamplight. He looked older than he had when we first pulled up to the house. I picked up the quilt from the floor and folded it over the back of the chair. Then I walked toward the stairs without another word. Behind me I heard my mother say my name softly, but I did not turn around. I needed to be alone with the truth that had finally come out into the open. The mountain valley that had started as a place for family to gather had become the place where I could no longer pretend the damage had not already been done. I closed the door to the small room I was sharing with Nicole and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside the window the stars were bright over the dark shapes of the mountains. Inside, the house felt different now. Smaller. More honest. I did not know what would happen in the morning when everyone woke up and had to look at each other across the breakfast table. I only knew that something had shifted in me that I could not shift back. The quiet strength I had always carried was still there, but it was no longer willing to protect the version of our family my older brother and my father had built without me. I pulled the old envelope from my pocket again and held it in my hands. The paper felt fragile, like the story it contained. For the first time I let myself wonder what it would cost me to stop carrying their version of my life and start living the one I had actually built. The next morning the house felt different, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I came downstairs to find my mother already at the stove, moving the spatula through scrambled eggs with slow, careful strokes. My father sat at the table with his coffee, the newspaper folded but unread in front of him. My cousin Nicole was quiet at the counter, stirring her tea longer than necessary. My older brother and his partner Eric were the last to appear. Andrew tried to act like nothing had happened, pouring himself coffee and making a joke about the trail we had hiked. No one laughed the way they usually did. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. I ate without tasting much. Every time I looked up I caught my mother watching me with that same small line between her eyebrows. My father kept his eyes on his mug. My cousin Nicole finally set her spoon down and said, softly but clearly, that she was sorry again for what had come out in the group chat. She looked straight at me when she said it. My older brother shifted in his chair but did not apologize. He simply muttered that it had been a private conversation and people were making too much of it. My father nodded once, almost to himself, as if agreeing that the whole thing could be smoothed over if we just stopped talking about it. After breakfast I asked my mother if she wanted to walk down to the creek with me. She hesitated, glancing at my father, then nodded. We put on light jackets and stepped out into the cool morning air. The mountains rose steady and green around us. For a while we walked without speaking. Then she said, in a voice I had not heard from her in years, that she had always known my older brother could be careless with his words. She had told herself it was just how brothers were. She had told herself that my father's silence was his way of keeping the peace. Hearing her say it out loud, after everything I had read and seen, made the old ache in my chest sharpen into something clearer. I told her about the text thread on the counter, about the letter I had found, about the years of small comments that had added up to a story I no longer recognized as mine. She stopped walking and turned to face me. Her eyes were wet but she did not cry. She said she was sorry she had not stood up for me sooner. She said she had been afraid of what would happen to the family if she pushed back. I believed her. I also knew that her fear had cost me something I could not get back. We stood there by the creek until the cold started to bite through our jackets, then turned and walked back to the house without making any promises we could not keep. That afternoon I received the message from my distant Aunt Carol. It came through as an email with several attachments. She had been in the family group chat the night before and had seen the forwarded thread. She wrote that she had been receiving similar messages from my older brother for years, sometimes about me, sometimes about other relatives, always framed as concern or honesty. She had saved some of them. She attached screenshots of conversations going back almost a decade, messages where my older brother had told her I was not as independent as I pretended to be and that my business was mostly for show. One of the older messages even referenced the same letter my father had drafted but never sent. My distant Aunt Carol wrote that she had stayed quiet for too long because she had not wanted to make things worse. She said she was sorry it had taken her this long to speak up. I read the email twice, sitting on the edge of the bed in the small room. The attachments confirmed what I had already begun to understand. The campaign had not started with the text thread I saw on the counter. It had been running quietly for years, fed by my older brother and allowed to continue by my father's silence. The natural consequences were already moving through the house. My cousin Nicole had stopped speaking to my older brother except when she had to. My mother kept finding small reasons to be in the same room as me. My father had not left the living room all morning, as if staying visible might somehow undo what had already been said. That evening I asked everyone to sit down together in the living room. The wood stove was lit again and the light was soft. I did not raise my voice. I simply placed the old envelope on the coffee table and told them what I had read on the phone, what I had found in the drawer, and what my distant Aunt Carol had just sent me. I told them how it felt to discover that the people I had kept showing up for had been quietly rewriting my life behind my back for years. My older brother tried to interrupt once, saying I was taking things too personally and that he had only been trying to protect the family from worry. My father stayed silent, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. My mother cried quietly into a tissue. My cousin Nicole kept her eyes on me the whole time, her face open and sorry. When my older brother finished speaking, I looked at him and said the words I had needed to say for a long time. I told him I was done letting him decide how much of my life was real. I told my father I was done waiting for him to choose me over the version of peace that required me to stay small. I said I would finish the trip because I had already paid for my share and because I was not going to let their choices force me out early. But I also said that when we all went home, I would not be coming to the next family gathering or the one after that. I would not be available for the casual check-ins or the group chats that pretended everything was fine. I needed space to rebuild trust that had been broken in ways I was still discovering. If that trust could ever be rebuilt, it would have to start with them being honest about what they had done. Until then, I was choosing the life I had actually built instead of the one they had described to other people. My older brother looked like he wanted to argue, but Eric put a hand on his arm and shook his head once. My father finally spoke. His voice was low and tired. He said he had not realized how much damage the silence had caused. He said he was sorry. I believed the sorrow was real. I also knew it did not change what had already happened or what I needed to do next. My mother reached for my hand again, and this time I let her hold it. We sat there until the fire burned low. No one tried to fix it with easy words. The quiet that settled over the room felt heavier than any argument we could have had. I left the mountain valley 2 days later, earlier than planned but not in the middle of the night like I had once imagined I might. I packed my bag while everyone else was out on a short walk. My mother came back in time to hug me at the door. She told me to call when I was ready. I told her I would, when I was ready. My father stood a few steps behind her and nodded once. My cousin Nicole hugged me tightly and said she would text me later, just the two of us. My older brother and Eric were still out on the trail. I did not wait for them. The drive south felt longer than the drive up had. Every mile put more distance between me and the version of our family that had lived in that mountain valley house. I cried once, quietly, on a long stretch of highway with the mountains behind me. It was not the loud, dramatic kind of crying. It was the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to purchase love with your silence and your presence. The tears felt like something being released rather than something being lost. In the weeks that followed, the natural consequences kept unfolding. My cousin Nicole stopped including my older brother in most of her messages to me. My distant Aunt Carol and I began a careful, honest correspondence that helped me understand how long the pattern had existed. My mother called once a week, short conversations that felt like she was learning how to be on my side without asking me to shrink. My father sent one email. It was short. He said he was trying to understand and that he hoped I would let him know when I was ready to talk. I have not answered it yet. I may never be able to answer it in the way he wants. My older brother has not reached out. I do not expect him to. The story he told about me for so many years protected something for him that he is not ready to examine. That is his choice. My choice has been to stop attending the gatherings where that story could still be told in my presence. I have missed the easy laughter and the shared meals. I have missed the version of family I once believed we could be. But I have not missed the slow erosion of my own reality. The calm sense of freedom I feel now is not loud or triumphant. It is quiet and steady, like the mountains I left behind. It is the freedom of knowing I no longer have to perform a smaller version of myself to keep the peace. I still run my small business. Orders still come in. Some days are harder than others, the way they are for anyone building something real. But I no longer wonder whether the people who are supposed to love me are quietly hoping I will fail so their story about me can stay intact. I chose myself in that mountain valley house, and I am still choosing myself every day I do not go back to the gatherings that required me to stay silent about the damage. It has cost me the easy version of family I once wanted. It has given me the honest version of my own life. That trade has been painful. It has also been necessary. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, type boundaries in the comments. I read every single one.